An International Monetary Fund team is currently in Sri Lanka to engage in talks with the Sri Lankan officials for the first review of the ongoing IMF Extended Fund Facility arrangement approved in March earlier this year. The second tranche, which amounts to $330 million, will be unlocked upon Sri Lanka successfully completing the upcoming progress review. During the visit, the team led by Peter Brewer and Masahiro Nozaki met with President Ranil Wickremesinghe yesterday. During the visit, the mission discussed additional fiscal efforts that will be critical to ensure successful revenue mobilization and progress on debt restructuring, whilst noting the ongoing discussions with both foreign and domestic creditors. The mission stressed that achieving timely restructuring agreements with creditors in line with the program targets by the time of the first review is essential to restoring debt sustainability. In a press briefing held today, the mission said that Sri Lanka is showing tentative signs of improvement, with inflation moderating, the exchange rate stabilizing, and the central bank rebuilding reserve buffers.
The people of Sri Lanka have shown remarkable resilience in the face of enormous challenges. Sri Lanka has made commendable progress in implementing difficult but much needed reforms. Inflation is down from a peak of 70% to today 1.3%. Gross international reserves increased by $1.5 billion between March and June this year, and shortages of essentials have eased. But full economic recovery is not yet assured. Growth momentum remains subdued, with real GDP contracting 3.1% in the second quarter this year on a year-on-year basis, and high-frequency economic indicators still sending mixed signals. In this challenging environment, the authorities have undertaken important steps on monetary and fiscal policies, as well as implemented structural reforms to address the ongoing economic crisis. More work still needs to be done to sustain the reform momentum and put the economy on a path towards lasting recovery and economic growth.
Have you mentioned that the IMF is unsatisfied with the government of Sri Lanka's tax collection system so far?
Tax collection gets an important pillar of the program because it's important to sustain the essential expenditures of the government. And these expenditures need to be sustained with an appropriate amount of revenues. In Sri Lanka, there is a big gap between these two. Expenditures are of the order of 19% or so of GDP. Revenue is in the order of 9% of GDP or so, and that gap needs to be filled. The reforms in this regard already started last year with significant tax policy reforms that essentially reversed some of the large tax cuts that had taken place in 2019. But that by itself isn't enough for Sri Lanka to bridge that gap mentioned and to step away from being one of the countries with the lowest tax takes in the entire world. And so discussions in that regard continue, ensure that the objectives of the program can be reached. And what we need is a clear path towards restoring debt sustainability. For the IMF to be able to go ahead, it needs to convince itself that debt sustainability can be restored. And to do that, we need to convince ourselves that discussions, negotiations that will result in debt treatments that will essentially be in line with the debt targets that we had set at the beginning of the program in March. When these debt targets can be reached, that is when we assess that debt sustainability can be restored. And
when is likely to the second tranche be disbursed if everything goes well?
There is no fixed timeline. As I mentioned, we need two important things to be satisfied. We need to have reached agreement on a set of policies and reforms that will allow us to go forward with the understanding that the objectives of the program can be reached. So now we've discovered there was a little bit of a shortfall in one area during this year, so we're looking to try and find ways to address that shortfall and compensate for it. Working in a direction of having agreement on these policies is one important prerequisite. And then the other one is in the area of debt. Is there a stable path towards debt sustainability, reaching agreements with creditors that will help restore debt sustainability in Sri Lanka? And so when these two conditions are met, we can go forward.